The signal the bridge of the UNSS Pathfinder hummed with the quiet efficiency of deep space operations. Captain Marcus Webb stood before the observation viewport, watching the stars blur past as the ship maintained its survey trajectory along the outer rim of charted space. It was routine work, the kind that made up 90% of exploration missions, cataloging stellar phenomena, mapping gravitational anomalies, and searching for signs of intelligent life that humanity had spent 2 centuries hoping to find more of. The discovery of faster-than-light travel had been humanity's ticket to the stars, but the galaxy had proven far more crowded than anyone expected. Within 50 years, Earth had made contact with the Galactic Council, a loose confederation of hundreds of species that had been navigating the cosmos for millennia. Humanity had been welcomed cautiously, as the newcomers always were. The galaxy watched Earth with curiosity and mild concern, another species from a high-gravity world, another product of a planet that seemed almost hostile to complex life. They called such worlds Deathworlds, and their inhabitants Deathworlders. It wasn't meant as a compliment. "Captain, I'm picking up something unusual," Lieutenant Chen called from the communication station. Her voice carried that particular note of concentration that came from trying to identify something that didn't quite fit the patterns. Marcus turned from the viewport. "Define unusual." "It's a signal, sir. Extremely faint. Probably why no one's detected it before. We're only catching it because we're practically on top of the source." She worked her console, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "It's repeating. Definitely artificial. And it's old. The degradation suggests it's been broadcasting for centuries." Dr. Amira Onkwo, the ship's chief xenolinguist, was already moving toward the communication station before Marcus could call for her. She was a tall woman with dark skin and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Born in Kenya and educated across 3 continents, she had been the first to crack the linguistic patterns of the Velani, one of the Council's founding species. If anyone could make sense of an unknown signal, it was her. "Put it through," Amira said, her accent carrying the musical cadence of her Swahili childhood. The bridge speakers crackled to life. What emerged wasn't sound, not exactly. It was data, compressed and encoded, carrying within it something that made the hair on Marcus's neck stand on end. Even without understanding the content, the desperation was palpable. This wasn't a greeting. This was a scream. Amira listened for 30 seconds, her expression growing darker with each passing moment. "Give me 15 minutes, she said quietly. "I need to run this through the translation matrix." Those 15 minutes felt like hours. Marcus ordered the Pathfinder to hold position, while the crew waited in tense silence. When Amira finally looked up from her workstation, her eyes were red-rimmed and her hands were trembling. "It's a distress call," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Multiple species, dozens of languages, all saying the same thing. They're calling for help. They're begging for someone, anyone, to save them from slavery." The word hit the bridge like a physical blow. Slavery. The practice had been outlawed on Earth for centuries, relegated to the darkest chapters of human history. The very concept was anathema to everything the United Nations stood for. "Where's it coming from?" Marcus asked. "Coordinates are embedded in the signal." "It's coming from the Kryn sector." Amira pulled up a star chart. A red marker appeared in a region of space that lay beyond the Council's established borders, in an area marked as restricted access. "The Kryn Empire," Chen breathed. "Sir, that's Council territory, technically." Marcus knew the name. Every human who'd studied galactic politics knew it. The Kryn Empire was an authoritarian regime that controlled a vast swath of space on the galaxy's outer rim. They were Council members, though barely. Their delegates attended sessions but rarely spoke, and other species gave them a wide berth. There were rumors, of course, whispers of labor camps, of conquered species, of brutality. But they were always just rumors. The Council never investigated. The Kryn kept to themselves and everyone seemed content to let them. "How long has this signal been broadcasting?" Marcus asked. Amira checked her data. "Best estimate? 600 years. Maybe more, 600 years. Generations had lived and died while this signal screamed into the void and no one had answered. No one had even heard it. "Set course for Council headquarters," Marcus ordered. His voice was steel. "Maximum velocity. And send a priority message to Earth Command. Tell them what we found." The Pathfinder came about, its drives flaring to life as the ship accelerated toward the heart of Council space. Behind them, the signal continued its endless broadcast. a ghost crying out across the darkness, waiting for someone to care enough to listen. When Marcus stood before the Galactic Council 3 weeks later, he expected investigation. He expected outrage. He expected action. What he got instead would change everything humanity thought it knew about the galaxy it had joined. The council chambers were vast, a circular amphitheater where representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to debate policy and adjudicate disputes. Marcus stood at the center, a holographic display showing the signal's contents floating above him. Beside him stood Amira and Admiral James Kuduzov, Earth's senior military representative to the council. The admiral was a broad-shouldered man with gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent 40 years in uniform. He had fought in the resource wars and helped establish humanity's first colony beyond Sol. He was not a man easily shaken, but as the council's response unfolded, Marcus watched something in the admiral's eyes change. "We are aware of the Kryn situation," Speaker Veleth said. The Velani diplomat spoke with the calm, measured tone of someone discussing weather patterns rather than centuries of suffering. "It is regrettable, but it does not fall under council jurisdiction to interfere in the internal affairs of member states." Internal affairs? Marcus's voice echoed through the chamber. "We're talking about slavery, about billions of sentient beings held in bondage. You're telling me the council considers this an internal matter? The Kryn Empire's labor practices are their own concern." Another delegate interjected. This one was Threxian, insectoid, his compound eyes reflecting no emotion Marcus could read. "They maintain order in their territory. What they do with conquered populations is not our business." "Not your business?" Amira stepped forward, her voice sharp. "We've translated the signal. There are at least 15 distinct species represented, 15 civilizations calling for help. How is that not everyone's business?" "Because intervention would mean war," Veleth said simply. "The Kryn have one of the largest military forces in the galaxy. Any action against them would result in massive casualties across multiple systems. The Council cannot condone such risk for what amounts to an internal political issue." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists. Around the chamber, he saw the same expression repeated on hundreds of alien faces. Discomfort, yes, but also resignation. They knew, they had always known, and they had decided long ago that some suffering was acceptable if it meant maintaining peace. "You've known about this for 600 years. Admiral Kuduzov said quietly. His voice carried across the chamber despite its low volume. "You've known and you've done nothing." "We have maintained stability," Veleth replied. "We have prevented galactic war. Surely you as a military commander understand the value of that." The admiral was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his words were measured but heavy with something dark and cold. "I understand that when I was a young man I swore an oath. To protect the innocent, to stand against tyranny, to never look away from injustice no matter how far away it might be." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from 100 worlds. "I see now that humanity may be alone in that oath, but we will honor it nonetheless." The council erupted into a cacophony of clicking, whistling, and shouting in a dozen languages. Through it all, Marcus heard the truth in the chaos: fear. They were afraid of the Kryn, yes, but they were also afraid of what humanity might do, of what it meant that a species from a death world looked at slavery and saw not a political problem, but a moral imperative. When the Pathfinder departed council space 2 days later, it carried with it more than just data about a distress signal. It carried the knowledge that humanity had finally seen the galaxy for what it truly was. Not a community of enlightened beings working toward a better future, but a collection of civilizations that had long ago decided that some lives were worth less than peace. Earth's response came swiftly. Within a month, the United Nations convened an emergency session. The debate lasted 17 hours. When it ended, the resolution passed with near unanimity. Humanity would not stand by. If the galaxy would not act, then Earth would act alone. The mission was designated Operation Liberation. Its goal was simple and absolute: free the enslaved species of the Kryn Empire regardless of the cost. Admiral Kutuzov was given supreme command. Every shipyard in human space began working triple shifts. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers faster than the military could process them. Humanity, it seemed, had finally found a cause worth fighting for. In the council chambers, Speaker Veleth watched the reports coming from Earth with growing alarm. The humans were mobilizing for war. Not conquest, not expansion, but liberation. It was unprecedented. It was illogical. It was, the speaker realized with a chill, exactly what one would expect from a species that had learned to thrive on a world that tried to kill them every day. The Deathworlders were coming, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Deathworld response, the transformation of human space, happened at a pace that stunned galactic observers. Within 6 months of the council meeting, every major shipyard from Earth to the outer colonies had been converted to military production. The orbital facilities above Mars, once dedicated to commercial freighters, now churned out warships at a rate that made council analysts check their data twice, certain there must be an error. There was no error. Humanity was preparing for war with an efficiency born from a species that had spent its entire history fighting. Against nature, against each other, and now against injustice itself. Admiral Kutuzov stood in the command center of the UNSS Liberator, humanity's first true dreadnought. The ship was a marvel of human engineering, combining cutting-edge council technology with innovations that only a Deathworld species would think to implement. Its armor was layered with materials designed to withstand atmospheric re-entry at terminal velocity. Its weapon systems included both energy weapons and kinetic options, because humans had learned long ago that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. A chunk of metal moving at relativistic speeds didn't care about shields or countermeasures. Fleet status? Kutuzov asked. Commander Sarah Chen, promoted from the Pathfinder after her role in discovering the signal, pulled up the tactical display. 217 ships hung in space, organized into battle groups. Destroyers, frigates, carriers, support vessels, and the 5 dreadnoughts that formed the fleet's backbone. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. "All ships report ready, sir," Chen said. "We have full crew complements, all supplies loaded, and the logistics train is in position." "And our volunteers?" Chen's expression softened slightly. That was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire operation. When the call had gone out for soldiers, the response had been overwhelming. People from every nation, every background, every walk of life had volunteered, not for glory or conquest, but because they could not stand by while others suffered. "We have 3 times more volunteers than we can accommodate," Chen reported. "The recruiting stations are still processing applications." Kutuzov nodded. He had expected as much. Humanity had its flaws. Centuries of wars and conflicts proved that. But there was something in the human spirit that rebelled against oppression, that couldn't tolerate the suffering of others. It was the same impulse that had driven humans to abolish slavery on Earth, to establish the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to reach for the stars in the first place. The belief that everyone deserved freedom, dignity, and hope. "Open a channel to all ships," Kutuzov ordered. Throughout the fleet, holographic displays flickered to life, showing the Admiral's weathered face. On 217 bridges, crews snapped to attention. 3 months ago, Kutuzov began, Captain Webb and Dr. Ayanquo brought us a signal from the darkness, a cry for help from beings we've never met, from species we know nothing about, from people who have suffered in silence for 600 years. The Galactic Council heard that signal and did nothing. They told us it wasn't our concern, that intervention would be too costly, that some injustices are too big to fight. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. But we are human. We are the species that looked at a planet trying to kill us and decided to thrive anyway. We are the descendants of people who crossed oceans in wooden boats, who built cities in deserts, who turned barren tundra into farmland. We are the children of every person who ever stood up to a bully, who ever risked everything to protect someone weaker, who ever looked at injustice and said no more. On the Liberator's bridge, Chen felt tears prickling her eyes. Around her, she saw the same emotion reflected on the faces of her crew. "The galaxy thinks we're reckless," Kutuzov continued. "They call us Deathworlders as if it's an insult. They think we don't understand the risks we're taking. But they're wrong. We understand perfectly. We know this mission will cost lives. We know we might fail. We know the Kryn Empire has been building its military for centuries, while we've barely been in space for 2. But here's what the galaxy doesn't understand about humanity. We don't measure the worth of a cause by its chance of success. We measure it by whether it's right. And freeing billions of sentient beings from slavery, that's about as right as it gets." The Admiral's voice hardened, taking on the edge of command. "So here's what's going to happen. We're going to jump to Kryn space. We're going to find every slave camp, every labor colony, every prison world, and we're going to liberate them, all of them. We're not going to stop until every chain is broken and every being is free. The Kryn Empire will learn what humanity learned centuries ago, that slavery is not an economic system or a political structure. It's evil, and evil doesn't get to negotiate. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes blazing. To every human in this fleet, you volunteered for this knowing you might not come home. You answered the call because you believe that freedom is worth fighting for. That makes you heroes, every single one of you. Your names will be remembered. Your children will tell stories about what we do here. And when the galaxy asks why humanity did this, why we risked everything for strangers we'd never met, the answer will be simple. Because we could. Because we had the power to help and the courage to act. Because we're human and we don't look away. The channel closed. For a moment, the fleet hung in silence. Then from 217 ships came a sound that no alien species had ever quite understood. The sound of humans cheering. A roar of defiance and determination that echoed through the void. Dr. Amira Onkwo watched the display from her station on the Liberator. She had been given a new role for this mission, Chief of Contact Operations. When they found the enslaved species, it would be her job to communicate with them to explain that help had finally arrived. She had spent the last 3 months learning every language in the Council database, preparing for a conversation that terrified and excited her in equal measure. What would she say to beings who had spent their entire lives in chains? How could she explain that humanity had heard their signal and decided to risk everything? Would they even believe her? Nervous? Marcus Webb asked, appearing at her side. The captain had been assigned command of the Pathfinder, now retrofitted as a scout vessel. Terrified, Amira admitted. What if we fail? What if we make things worse? Marcus was quiet for a moment. My grandfather fought in the liberation wars in Africa, he said finally, back when warlords were still trying to hold on to power through violence and fear. I asked him once if he ever doubted what he was doing, if he ever wondered if intervention was making things worse. What did he say? He said that doubt is the price of conscience, that if you never question your actions, you're probably doing something wrong. But he also said that sometimes the only way to make things better is to stand up and fight, even when the outcome is uncertain, that doing nothing because you might fail is just another way of accepting evil. Amira nodded slowly. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. He was. And he taught me something else too. Marcus smiled slightly. He taught me that humanity's greatest weapon isn't technology or tactics. It's hope. The belief that tomorrow can be better than today, and that we have the power to make it so. The fleet's engines flared to life, reality bending around them as FTL drives engaged. In seconds, 217 human warships vanished from Council space, jumping toward a sector where no help had come for 600 years. They carried with them the hopes of billions of enslaved beings who had given up on rescue. They carried humanity's message to the galaxy, that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. And they carried the promise that Earth had made when it first reached the stars, that freedom was not negotiable, and that no one would suffer alone while humanity had the strength to help. Behind them, the Galactic Council watched in stunned silence. Some species felt admiration, others felt fear, most felt confusion. How could any species be so reckless, so idealistic, so willing to sacrifice for strangers? But on 100 worlds, in homes and shelters and places where hope had long since died, beings looked up at the stars and whispered prayers. Because somewhere in the darkness the Deathworlders were coming, and they were bringing liberation. The breaking of chains. The first battle of Kryn 7 would be studied in military academies for generations, not because of tactical brilliance or technological superiority, but because of what it represented. The moment humanity announced to the galaxy that Deathworlders fought differently. The planet was a labor colony, home to approximately 8 million enslaved beings from a dozen conquered species, according to intelligence gathered from the signal and subsequent reconnaissance. They worked in orbital refineries, processing rare minerals under conditions that killed approximately 15% of the workforce annually. The Kryn simply replenished losses from other conquered worlds. It was efficient, brutal, and had been operating for over 4 centuries. Admiral Kuduzov had chosen Kryn 7 as the first target specifically because it was heavily defended. Orbital platforms, defensive satellites, and a garrison of Kryn warships made it a fortress. The Council would have called it impregnable. Humanity called it a statement. The battle began at 600 ship time. The human fleet emerged from FTL at the system's edge, weapons hot and shields at maximum. The Kryn response was immediate. 30 warships moved to intercept, supported by the orbital defenses. It was more than enough firepower to destroy a fleet twice humanity's size, at least according to conventional galactic warfare doctrine. But humans didn't fight conventionally. All fighters launch, Commander Chen ordered from the Liberator's bridge. Kinetic batteries target those orbital platforms. I want them neutralized before they can fire on the transports. The human fleet split into 3 groups, moving with a coordination that seemed almost organic. The Kryn formation, designed to concentrate firepower and present a unified front, suddenly found itself facing attacks from multiple vectors simultaneously. Human destroyers, smaller and faster than their Kryn equivalents, wove through the battlefield like dancers, their point defense systems creating patterns of destruction that shredded incoming missiles. The Kryn had shields, excellent shields, in fact based on technology refined over millennia, but humanity had learned something during its brief time in space. Shields were designed to defend against energy weapons. A sufficiently massive object moving fast enough simply punched through, converting kinetic energy into devastation. The Liberator's railguns fired. Slugs of tungsten and titanium, each weighing several tons and moving at a significant fraction of light speed, crossed the distance to the Kryn flagship in seconds. The shields flared, absorbed the first 2 impacts, and then shattered under the third. The 4th slug punched through the flagship's hull like paper, and the massive vessel began to break apart. "Sir, the Kryn are requesting a ceasefire," Chen reported, surprise evident in her voice. "They're asking for terms." Kutuzov's expression was granite. "Tell them we have one term. Surrender the planet and evacuate all military forces within the hour. Any attempt to harm the enslaved population will result in complete annihilation of their fleet. They're protesting, sir, saying this violates council law. Council law permitted slavery," Kutuzov cut her off. "I'm not interested in their laws. Send the message." The Kryn commander, faced with a fleet that had just destroyed his flagship in the opening salvo, chose survival. Within 45 minutes, Kryn forces were evacuating. Within an hour, human Marines were landing on Kryn 7. Dr. Amira Anquo stood in the landing bay of the transport Unity, checking her translation devices one last time. Around her, Marines prepared their equipment with practiced efficiency. These weren't warriors meant for conquest. They were rescue workers armed for combat, medics with weapons training, engineers who could fight if needed, but whose primary mission was to break chains and restore hope. The transport touched down near one of the massive labor facilities. As the ramp lowered, Amira took her first breath of Kryn 7's air, recycled, sterile, with an undertaste of chemicals that spoke of industrial processes running without proper environmental controls. The facility's main entrance was sealed. 2 Marines placed charges and stepped back. The explosion was surgical, precise, enough to breach the door without risking anyone inside. As smoke cleared, Amira stepped through. The chamber beyond was vast, filled with machinery that stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadows. And everywhere amid the equipment and conveyor systems were beings. Hundreds of them, thousands perhaps, representing species Amira had never seen before. They stood frozen, staring at the humans with expressions that ranged from confusion to terror. Amira activated her translation device and spoke, her words converted into multiple languages simultaneously. "My name is Dr. Amira Anquo. I represent the United Nations of Earth and the human species. 600 years ago, your ancestors sent a signal into space calling for help. We heard it, and we've come to answer." Silence. The being stared, uncomprehending. One of them, a bipedal creature with scaled skin and multiple eyes, stepped forward hesitantly. When it spoke, its voice was rasping as if long unused. "You came for us?" "Yes," Amira said simply. "We came for you. All of you. We're here to free you." The being's legs gave out. It collapsed to the floor, and Amira realized with shock that it was weeping. Around the chamber, the sound spread, a wave of emotion that had been suppressed for generations. Beings fell to their knees, some crying, some shouting, some simply staring in disbelief. "You're free," Amira repeated, tears streaming down her own face. As of this moment, you're all free. A Marine approached, his expression carefully neutral in the way of soldiers witnessing something that transcends tactics and training. Dr. Anqua, we're finding more facilities. Thousands more enslaved beings. And ma'am, some of them have never known anything but captivity. Their grandparents were born here. They don't know what freedom means. Amira nodded, wiping her eyes. Then we'll teach them. That's why we're here. The liberation of Kryn 7 took 3 days. Human personnel worked around the clock, breaking open facilities, providing medical care, distributing food and supplies, and beginning the enormous task of planning what came next. The freed beings couldn't simply be left to fend for themselves. Many were malnourished. Most had medical conditions from years of hard labor, and all carried psychological trauma that would require time and care to heal. But they were free. For the first time in 600 years, they were free. News of Kryn 7 spread through the galaxy at light speed. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, with Speaker Veleth demanding explanations and threatening sanctions. The human ambassador's response was broadcast across every council world. Humanity acknowledges that we have violated council protocols regarding non-interference. Ambassador Torres stated calmly, "We accept full responsibility for our actions. We also inform the council that we have no intention of stopping. There are 147 known Kryn labor colonies. We will liberate them all. If the council wishes to help, we welcome the assistance. If not, we will do it alone. But we will not stand by while billions suffer." The speech caused an uproar. Some species condemned humanity's actions as reckless and dangerous. Others remained silent, watching. But on dozens of worlds, something unexpected happened. Individuals from other species, not governments but people, began volunteering to help. Ships arrived at human space stations carrying supplies, medical equipment, and refugees seeking to assist in the liberation efforts. The Villani delegation, surprisingly, broke from Speaker Veleth's position. "Our government may not support Earth's actions," their junior ambassador announced, "but I cannot remain silent. Humanity is right. Slavery cannot be tolerated. I resign my position to volunteer for Operation Liberation." He was not alone. Within weeks, a coalition of species, small, unofficial, but growing, began to form around humanity's cause. They called themselves the Liberation Alliance, and their message was simple: freedom was not a human ideal. It was universal. Admiral Kutuzov stood on the bridge of the Liberator 6 months into the campaign, reviewing progress reports. 73 colonies liberated, 16 million beings freed. Human casualties stood at just over 2,000. Tragic losses, each one mourned but far fewer than projected. The Kryn Empire, facing a guerrilla campaign across multiple fronts and internal unrest from conquered species inspired by Earth's actions, was beginning to fracture. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Kryn High Command," Chen reported. The face that appeared on screen was reptilian, with intelligent eyes that held something Kutuzov hadn't expected to see: resignation. "Admiral Kutuzov," the Kryn commander said, "my government has authorized me to negotiate a ceasefire." "The terms haven't changed," Kutuzov replied. "Complete liberation of all enslaved populations, reparations to be negotiated, prosecution of those responsible for atrocities non-negotiable. We accept." The words came quickly, as if the speaker wanted them over with. "The Kryn Empire agrees to immediate cessation of slavery and will cooperate fully with liberation efforts. We ask only for protection from reprisals." Kutuzov was silent for a long moment. Part of him, the part that had seen the labor camps, that had witnessed the suffering, wanted to refuse. But vengeance wasn't the mission. Liberation was, agreed, he said finally. "Any Kryn who participated in atrocities will face justice through proper channels. Those who were simply following orders will be allowed to rebuild their society peacefully. But the slavery ends. Now. Today." The transmission ended. Chen looked at the Admiral with wide eyes. "Sir, we won." "No," Kutuzov corrected gently. "They won." He gestured to a display showing images of freed beings celebrating their liberation across dozens of worlds. "We just helped." The aftermath of Operation Liberation reshaped the galaxy. The Galactic Council underwent massive reforms, with several founding species losing their positions due to their inaction during the crisis. New legislation was passed making slavery a crime against sapience, enforceable by any council member. The Liberation Alliance became a permanent organization, dedicated to preventing such atrocities from occurring again. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity. The term Deathworlder took on a new meaning. It no longer implied recklessness or danger. Instead, it became synonymous with courage, with moral conviction, with the willingness to stand against injustice regardless of the cost. On Earth, in Geneva, a new monument was erected. It showed a human figure breaking chains, but the figure's face was intentionally left blank. The inscription read, "To every being who refused to accept injustice, to every person who chose action over comfort, to those who looked at suffering and said no more, you are all Deathworlders. You are all human in spirit." And on 147 liberated worlds, in homes and schools and public squares, beings taught their children about the day the signal was finally answered, about the species that heard their cry and came from across the stars to help, about the Deathworlders who proved that the strongest force in the universe wasn't weapons or technology. It was compassion backed by the courage to act. The galaxy had begged for help, and Earth had answered. In doing so, humanity had shown that being from a Deathworld didn't make you dangerous. It made you strong. Strong enough to fight, strong enough to sacrifice, strong enough to stand up and declare that everyone, regardless of species, origin, or circumstance, deserved freedom. The stars had witnessed the birth of a new age, and at its heart stood humanity, imperfect and idealistic, stubborn and compassionate, forever asking the same question that had driven them since the first humans looked up at the night sky. What kind of future do we want to build? And what are we willing to do to make it real? The answer, as the galaxy had learned, was everything.